Classic arcade and console gaming continues today on Mikey's Lab. Hi, and welcome back to the lab. If this is your first time joining us, go ahead and click the subscribe button down below to ensure that you get the latest news on engineering, DIY, making, science, and technology. Today in the lab, we have our third video on our retro gaming series, where we're taking this little Raspberry Pi and producing the ultimate in retro, arcade, and console gaming. The Raspberry Pi is a very versatile single board computer. It is by far the most common one that is used for this. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump straight down to the PC. We're going to download the image needed for the RetroPie SD card. We're going to burn the SD card, and we're going to get this thing going. Alright, so here we are at the PC. The first thing we need to do is get the RetroPie image for an SD card. So we're going to just quickly Google RetroPie. And we're going to go to the main website here. And as you can see, it's a colorful website with a very familiar logo for us. We're going to click on the download link at the top eventually here. One of the things I do want to call attention to, because this is free software, there is a donate link right here. It's always a good idea to give back to the projects that we use. It helps fund the open source community and helps development keep going. So if we just scroll down a little bit, we'll see the image download section here for Raspberry Pi 0 and 1 and Raspberry Pi 2 and 3. I do not recommend doing this project with anything less than a 2 or 3, so we're going to click that and it's going to start downloading. Now while that is downloading, we're going to need some other software in order to prep the SD card and write this out to the and write the image out to the SD card. So we're going to grab the SD card formatter tool. What this does is if you've ever installed an image for Raspberry Pi on any of the other things like Debian or the other distributions that are available, it formats the SD card and creates multiple partitions. What the SD card formatter allows you to do is to bring that back to a single partition of the maximum size that's available. So we click download, and now we're just going to agree to the terms of service, and it will start downloading in the background. The other utility that we need to get is the Win32 Disk Imager, which under Windows is the tool that you use to write the image to the SD card. So again, we just Google the tool's name. And this one will be downloaded from SourceForge. And we'll click download. And after a brief delay here, it should start downloading at the bottom left of our screen. There it goes. Okay, so the other tool that we're going to need for this, which apparently I don't already have installed, and I thought I did, is WinRAR, which will allow us to decompress this compressed image out to a .img file, which the Win32 Disk Imager can then go ahead and write to the SD card for us. So once again, just Google the name of the tool. I'll put a link in the description below. All these links will be down there. Click on Downloads. Click on the 64-bit edition for my particular case. If you're running a 32-bit operating system, the 32-bit version of yours. And in the bottom left, it starts to download automatically for us. Okay, once that's done, we're going to open that particular file first, and we're going to install that program. This one doesn't install a whole lot of stuff with it, so I just accept the defaults and continue through. And we'll close the window that pops up here, and we'll go back to the next thing, which will be the image itself. This time it opens in WinRAR and shows us the actual IMG file, which we will extract to the desktop. I like to put things like this on the desktop because that just makes it easier for me to find later. If you want to do it somewhere else, by all means. The amount of time it takes to extract this will depend heavily on the type of computer you're using. This is my brand new laptop, so things are nice and fast. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and install the SD card formatter. This will again allow us to make sure that the partitioning of the SD card makes sense before we burn the retropie image to it. I will accept the defaults. This will take a couple minutes to install for us. I'll click next. Accept the license agreement next. Install in your default location and go. Okay. And take that off and click finish. And then we'll go to my start menu and launch the program. Okay, now when you're using tools like this, one of the things you want to be sure of right away is the drive that you're working with. These tools can do a lot of damage to a drive if you've got the wrong one selected. So again, just verify that that's properly selected. We're going to do a quick format, which looks like it just changed away from. We're going to change the name of the SD card. Just leave it blank and say quick format and click go. And this will once again erase any partitions that are currently on this SD card and replace it with a single, in this case I think 14 gig image of the 16 that's available on this SD card. Okay, so we'll go ahead and close that, and then we'll launch the Win32 disk imager. This is the tool that will actually burn the image onto the SD card itself. So we're going to go ahead and choose the image that we want to burn, which we'd save to the desktop. So we'll choose the desktop, and we'll choose the retropie image, and we'll click open. And then once again, we want to verify that we're using the right drive. If you write this image to the wrong drive, you could quite easily destroy whatever drive you mistakenly told it to write to. So just make sure that that's the right drive and click right. Click yes. And it's going to start writing this to the SD card. Once again, the speed at which this goes by is dependent on the speed of the PC that you're doing it on. I'm probably going to speed this part up because there's no point in making you sit through all this. Okay, so the image writing is just finishing up now, and we will have an SD card ready to insert into the Raspberry Pi. So now we've moved away from the desktop. We have our SD card ready. We have retropie burned onto the SD card, and we have our Raspberry Pi right here. So now we're going to take the base table where we installed all of the common electronics in the last video to, and we're going to attach the Raspberry Pi to it, power it up, and see some games going. So the first step is to plug in a very short USB cable, because the longer it is, the more we have to coil and tuck somewhere in this thing. So we're going to go ahead and pull our USB hub out, and we're going to plug the Raspberry Pi into the USB hub, and then seemingly backwards and seemingly weird, we're going to take the USB hub and we're going to plug it into the Raspberry Pi, because we need to connect to the devices that are attached to the USB hub to the Raspberry Pi as well. The other thing we're going to plug in while we have a second is the USB for the arcade controls. And we're going to plug in our HDMI to VGA adapter. So with the Raspberry Pi, I will be tucking it back into that corner, tucking the hub back into where we said the hub was going to go. And now we're just ready to install the monitor. Alright, so now we're ready to drop the monitor in now that the Raspberry Pi is in there and hooked up. My particular monitor, and Trap for new players, requires the buttons to be connected to work. If they're not connected, it won't work. It will turn on, it'll show the display pattern, but it will not connect to VGA in any way, and all you get is a blank screen. For some reason, it clued into me to plug this in, and all of a sudden it worked. So this is going to live in the table from now on. You have your standard VGA monitor. The reason I'm calling attention to this is most people do not screw these in. They just plug these in. It's going to live inside of a table. It's going to be rather hard to get to later. Screw it in. Okay, now the other end of the VGA cable obviously connects to the HDMI to VGA adapter, which is inside of the table already. And unfortunately, that one doesn't actually screw in. So now you get to play some, I don't know where the cable's going to go with getting this into this particular cable here. I'm going to start running the VGA cable on the outside of where the monitor goes. And it looks like that's going to work. We'll just leave it kind of set in place like so. We'll have to grab the power cable for the monitor. Plug the power cable for the monitor in. Make sure that this little cable for there is in the right spot, and that is in the right spot. And we can drop the monitor in place. Like so. And the only thing left to do is to tip it onto its side, line up the screws, and screw the monitor down. I'm not going to do that yet because I want to make sure it works first. So everybody stand back in case this light's on fire. Monitor is turning on, that's a good sign. I can't see if the retropie has power or if anything's booting, but the monitor's turning on. You can see the Raspberry Pi booting up at this point, and it goes up into the retropie screen. retropie does take a little bit of time to power up, especially with the hard drive in place. Most of what we'll do for the configuration will happen via SSH. I just want to show the menu and show that this is running games at this point. As I've mentioned before in this series, I am in no way going to tell you where to get the ROMs, but Google's your friend. On a side note, if anybody finds a great place to get legal ROMs, let me know. Leave in the comments. Okay, an emulation station is loading now, which is the front end that handles all of the emulation for Raspberry Pi, or for RetroPie. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go to, I'm going to go to my favorite one because this is my show. And Super Mario World 3 for the Super Nintendo powers up and runs fine. I understand this is not normally an arcade game, but trust me, it's just as much fun playing with the classic arcade controls. Let's take this back to the PC. We'll configure SSH on the Raspberry Pi. We'll get the last little pieces set up. We'll move the ROMs over to the hard drive so we have lots of space, and we'll create the symlink.
Alright, so here we are at the SSH prompt for the RetroPie Raspberry Pi. You got here the normal way. If you have any trouble enabling SSH, take a look at the Maker Basics Installing Raspbian series. That's in there. One of the first things I always do whenever I set up a new Raspberry Pi here is to change the root password or the Pi password. In this case, we're going to do both. we don't want to leave a wide open door on our network. So it's very, very important that we secure this properly. And the second one just changes the password for Pi as well. First one did the root password. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the USB devices that are currently connected to the Raspberry Pi. You can see that the mass storage device I have doesn't actually send a name through. It's definitely the second one in that list right there. So we're going to look at the disks that are currently mounted, because sometimes the Raspberry Pi will auto-mount the USB mass storage, in which case this one it did. It does let us know that it's /dev/SDA1, which is kind of handy. So we're going to have to go ahead and unmount that right now in order to work with it. So my first attempt here will probably fail because I'm forgetting to do the sudo in front of it. Yep. Okay, so we've unmounted that device, and if we do another df, it will show us that that device had. Alright, so now we're going to edit a file that will tell the Raspberry Pi every time it boots we want to mount that USB drive to a specific part of the directory tree. That file is in the etc folder like most configuration files are, and it's called fstab. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add another line to this. We know that the device is /dev/SDA1. We want to mount it to /home /retropie, or sorry, /home /pi /retropie /roms. This is Linux, so case sensitive again. Very important, make sure you get that right. This is going to be an ext4 file system. We're going to tell it to mount with the default options. And we're going to trail that with a 00. You can go ahead and save that file and exit it. The next step that we're going to have to do, we're going to have to go ahead and change or format that file system that we just added to an ext4 file system. And that's done simply with the makefs.ext4 command you see here. I, of course, did use sudo for that. Make sure that you do, otherwise you will get an access error. It'll ask you if you're sure if there is already a file system there, which there most likely is. This particular step can take a fair bit of time. So depending on the size of the drive, it's going to exponentially grow the bigger the drive is. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm actually just using a USB key so that there isn't an exceptional amount of time here. Okay, so that file system is now formatted. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to mount this particular drive to a different folder than we intend it to live at forever. So I'm going to probably put it to media/USB 0. Reason for this is we need to copy what's currently in the ROMs folder, which is basically just a directory structure, over to the new drive before we can replace it with this drive being mounted there. So we're going to go into retropie, we're going to go into ROMs, and we're going to go into the retropie folder. We're going to move the ROMs folder and everything underneath it to the media/USB 0 that we set up for the mount before. And of course I forgot to use the super user, so give me 1 second. Okay, so that moved that entire directory structure over for us. If we go into the ROMs folder now, we should see that there's nothing in there, and there isn't. Okay, so now we can try to mount that USB, or unmount that USB from where it is now into where it will be all the time. Okay, now we're just going to mount it using the FS tab. I forgot sudo again. I always forget to do that. Okay, so now we see, because we haven't backed out of the folder and gone back in, there's nothing in there right now. You have to leave the folder and come back before there'll be anything in there. But if we take a look at the mount command, we should see it mounted there. Yeah, that last line there, /dev/sda, mounted to retropie ROMs. So now if we go back into that folder, and do an ls here, we have all of the directories that were originally there. And this folder is now mapped to that USB drive. This will allow us to have a lot more ROMs on our system without a very expensive flash card. It will also help to preserve the life of the SD card that is being used for this project. So we're going to go ahead and tell this to reboot. Once this reboots, we're going to connect via SCP, and we're going to transfer some ROMs. Okay, so now we're ready to add some ROMs to our retropie installation here. I tend to use this program called WinSCP to do that. It transfers over SSH. When you look here, it's going to want to do SFTP primarily. You want to switch that to SCP. Put in the IP address of our Raspberry Pi. If you haven't found it, it's under the retropie menu in retropie, and then show IP. Port 22 as usual. We're going to use the Pi user. So the username is Pi, and the password will be whatever you changed it to during the last section when we did the configuration. This comes up, and now you have a retropie folder on the right. On the left, we're going to go find where our ROMs are stored locally on our computer. And we're just going to go to the retropie ROMs folder. And now whatever system we're copying to, we find the subfolder for that system. So in this case, we're just going to do PSX. You can see that I've copied some there already, but it's not a complete list. We'll scroll down and find out that I left off on the Final Fantasy there. So we're going to scroll through the list on the left until we find the Final Fantasy Tactics. And scroll all the way down, selecting the remaining ROMs that need to be transferred over. Fair warning, transferring via SSH or the Samba share to the Raspberry Pi can take quite a bit of time. So I'm not going to sit here and make you watch this transfer for 2.5, 3 hours. I'm just going to end the sequence very shortly with the understanding that you now know how to get ROMs to the table itself.
So our retro arcade and console table is now completed, up and running video games with a Raspberry Pi. There's still some configuration and tweaks that need to be done in order to get the most out of this system. For one, you're going to need to download or acquire a ROM set and add it into the Raspberry Pi. I'm not going to tell you where to get the ROMs. If you know any good legal sources, please comment section down below. At this point, you should be up in gaming, and you should have a good time. Next video that we're going to have, we'll be doing this with the IMX6 processor. I may add another video in between with some enhancements to the table that I've decided to do in the meantime. So that video might precede the IMX6 video, but either way, things are looking great from here. I want to thank you for joining me in the lab today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't, tell me why in the comments below. Don't forget to share. Subscribe if you haven't already to make sure you get the latest news from the lab. I hope you learned something today, and have a great night.